Hey Vivid, I wanted to reach out and get a bit of advice. Following the techniques you sent me isn't really seeming to work. The wet application works great for the flat panels, and the finish is absolutely awesome. But for the life of me, no matter how much I wait, I just can't get the edges to stick. Tack solution, no dice. Letting it dry overnight, not much better. And it's not like waiting is really good when I just want to try it again. Some panels look good and some don't. It's so inconsistent, it's like I'm wrapping two different cars. I've just got to be doing something wrong, and all I'm really hoping is that you can point me in the right direction. All the best, Hunter. Is this attempt really going to be that much different? I let it dry way longer than they suggest, so maybe. But at this point, it's been so inconsistent, who really knows? No two cars need the same prep, huh? Guess that makes sense. And yeah, I figured as much. It's not like this film was designed for a car like this. At least they think it's possible. Well, I guess if he doesn't know what the problem is, nobody will. Just like Vvivid said, CK Wraps reached out, a literal professional when it comes to installing these films. And right now, my biggest hope for figuring out what exactly I'm doing wrong. Much easier said than done when he's not here to actually see the car. Still, the help is tremendously appreciated. And even in the little time I've known him, I've already learned a lot about what I've been doing wrong, and even have some concrete suggestions for how to go forward. All of which really starting with the panel I left off with. This was a wet application, and specifically with that application method, time is of the essence. I needed to let all of the edges completely dry for them to get their tack back. Otherwise, they're just not going to stick to the car. So before I completely rule out this method, I need to see if that advice works. Beforehand, a divot like this just wouldn't have stuck to the car. But now, after waiting a day, it's actually working. And what's even better is since the material is dry now, it feels exactly like vinyl does, which is something I've done before. In other words, this might actually work. It's just a long and time-consuming process to push all the bubbles out of the film. Very satisfying though. For the most part, this process was actually working. I was still having a little trouble getting it to stick up in the corners, and especially wrapping around the front of the car, but I feel like this was at least a step in the right direction. The edges were sticking, if only for a little bit. Right now, the issue is, every time I had to adjust them, they started sticking less and less. Still, some stick is better than none. So I pressed on, hoping to complete my quest that I started a while ago to get one good panel. One panel that I could keep on the car. That little bit of hope didn't last too long, though. I guess that's what I get for getting excited it was finally working. Back to square one, meaning it's gotta come off and likely will take paint with it. Strange. This PPF was cured to the car just about as much as the other side was, but the amount of paint it took off was completely different. And what's even weirder is the way it removed the paint was different. On the other side, huge chunks came off. Clear, base, it didn't matter. This side, however, went straight down to primer, but not in chunks, in little speckled holes. Weird. I wish it was at least more consistent. And that kind of makes me wonder how the rest of the car is going to behave. The reason we're doing a wet install to begin with is because they said it would be the only way that this car would not be torn to shreds with the adhesive. So their assumption is that a dry install like this will take off the entire panel of paint. I guess if I'm already going to reprep some of the car, I might as well see if that's the case. Huh. It actually didn't take off any paint. And unlike with the wet install, this dry application is still sticky and can stick to the car again, since it's a time-based adhesive. Yeah, that makes sense actually. So if I'm understanding this right, I'm just now learning that a dry install does not have enough time to properly adhere to the surface and pull up paint when I adjust it. Whereas a wet install is always going to pull up paint due to the nature of me having to let it dry. So even though it's the opposite of what they're telling me to do, would a completely dry install work? Worth a shot. Since, according to CK and the people who make this film, this has a really high chance of pulling off the rest of the paint, I'm gonna test this on the fender that is already destroyed. No prep, not permanent, nothing like that. Right now I just need to know if this is going to work and if it's an option that I'll have going forward. And almost immediately I can tell it's a much faster process than a wet install. It feels a lot like traditional vinyl, but this material is so much more forgiving. Due to the different molecular structure, it's softer by nature. I'm still using a bit of heat to stretch it in places, but for the most part, this film is thin enough and it's flexible enough that it's very, very workable. In roughly a third of the time it took me to get the flat pieces done with a wet application, I finished the entire fender. Too bad I was dumb and decided not to prep it beforehand, but I guess I couldn't have known it was gonna work. Resanded, recleaned, and then tossed on a new piece of PPF onto the panel, following the same exact dry application approach that nobody really thought would work but me. And since I don't have to wait for anything to dry, I can do the whole panel all at once. So it's really just like way easier to work with vinyl at this point. The issue is, even with all that prep, the panel didn't turn out perfect. Readjusting it for the edges did pull up a bit of paint. That little speckled texture did happen in places, but the rest of the panel was looking pretty good, which is making me want to try it on the door. This must be what it's like when things start to click. It's funny how doing the exact opposite of what I was suggested to do is working wonderfully. Compared to vinyl, this stuff is comically easy to work with. The air bubbles push out easy, and due to how much thinner it is than vinyl, it basically just melts onto the surface. And the best and most confusing part is this door didn't have any of those speckling issues the other panel did. In fact, I think the door is a panel I would consider good enough to keep. Maybe it has finally clicked. Maybe I won't run into those inconsistent errors that I have been. Maybe it just took a little bit of time to figure out the best way to do it. Clean the car with IPA, and then a simple dry application. Maybe simpler is better. After about an hour, both doors were complete, and in this case, I think I mean keepable complete. And the finish, compared to how the car started, is completely absurd. Glossy, deep, gorgeous. And the best part is, as I picked it up to adjust it, nothing speckled, nothing chipped. The surface just kind of accepted it. So I'm thinking the speckles weren't inconsistent at all. That was me just learning and doing things wrong the first time. So I figure I don't lose much by continuing this method on a much bigger panel, the hood. The issue is, almost immediately after I removed the backing paper and tacked down the surface, the first time I adjusted it, the speckles were back. Way worse, too. And it's not like I didn't prep the hood or anything, but every time I adjust it, it seems like the speckles get worse, to the point where I'm getting so frustrated, I'm wanting to restart. I'm doubting myself. Maybe I forgot to clean the surface. There's no harm in just trying again. I'll clean it better this time and it'll look perfect. I threw the second attempt on the hood and cleaned it way better than the first attempt. I figured that was how I messed up the first time, so it can't be much worse. But it was. Loads worse, actually. And every time I adjusted it, or stretched the film, it got worse too. Even though it was wet sanded to 1600, up close the whole thing looked like it was covered in orange peel. But this film is also not cheap. So even though I know I'm not going to be happy with this panel, I think for now, it's worth finishing just for the practice. I thought I finally learned how to make this consistent, but I guess not. Maybe I'm overthinking this. This car was terrible to begin with, and right now this is night and day better. But I can't help myself from noticing the imperfections. From 3 feet away, it looks great, but any closer than that and it looks like the surface was never sanded. Textured speckling as far as the eye can see. I don't know why adjusting on some panels will lift the paint and on others won't do a thing. I'll definitely have to redo this panel. I just wish it was predictable is all. The next morning, in a fit of frustration, I decided to completely ignore the hood and return to the world of fenders. And for some reason, I was still convinced that this dry application method was the way to go. Yep, doing the same thing and expecting a different result. In most cases, insanity. In this inconsistent case, maybe worth a shot? After sanding and cleaning the surface, I laid the new PPF on the car and proceeded to follow the exact same method that I used on the hood the night before. Nothing changed technique-wise, but the result absolutely did. This resulted in by far the best panel I've ever wrapped. And I changed nothing to get it. It just didn't make sense. I can't believe this fender looks like this. This panel was prepped worse than the hood. Maybe a couple minutes of sanding versus a couple hours, but the material just worked. The bubbles pushed out, the edges stuck, no stretching, no miscolored heating. It just looks good. So why does the hood look like this? How do I go from the worst panel to the best panel while changing nothing? That's just not possible. Something has to change to get a different result. That's how things work. So what is it? The technique was consistent other than I guess I learned a little bit on the way. I went from a fender, which speckled, straight into 2 doors, which turned out absolutely fantastic. You'd think it would keep getting better, but no. Right after I felt like I understood the technique, I produced the worst panel ever, twice in a row. Consistently inconsistent. And I follow up the inconsistency with more inconsistency. The best attempt on the fender. I've said it before and I'll say it again. These issues are so inconsistent panel to panel, it's like I'm wrapping 2 different cars. I think I might actually be wrapping 2 different cars. It makes sense that you wouldn't prep 2 cars the same way, but I did. The fender and the hood aren't from this car, and I've been going from an original panel to one of these panels since the very beginning, ever since I started trying to learn this, and I prepped both the same even though the issues that they're having paint-wise are very different. The doors that worked great, green and original. The fender that speckled when it was lifting, as well as the hood, which also speckled when it was lifting, replacements from another car with different paint that lived a different life. How did I not realize this until now? This process has not been inconsistent. The surface has. Hey Vvivid, you know what I said earlier? Well, scratch all that. I still don't really know what to believe, but I think I have a rough idea to move forward. This car is both prepped for PPF and unprepped for PPF. Maybe the whole time I was looking for something I was doing wrong, I was looking in the wrong place. This is going to be possible after all. I just need to get both cars to be one surface again. Funny what a little learning will do to you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. That's the best way you can help support me and my content. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.